time Magnus had seen such devastation was on Terra. Much of the throne world was still in ruins, its many civilizations swept away by continent cracking weapons, and the monolithic structures of the Imperium yet to be completed. By the time Magnus had come to his father's side, the reconstruction was well underway, but vast swathes of the planet's populace were yet to benefit from the Emperor's worldwide efforts, even so long after unity had been declared. It had been a humanitarian crisis of global proportions, but one met with a coordinated response. No such response would be forthcoming for Atar's people. The city resembled a scene straight from the imaginings of the ancient dramaturgs. A new and ferocious night had descended on Atar. The sky, sunless as tar black smoke from the city-wide conflagration that was blotting out the light. Flames from the burning promethium silos that had fallen into abysmal chasms, splitting the waterless bay, illuminated the ruins with blood-red firelight. Atar's hat blocks had tumbled as easily as children's bricks, casting into one another to form grotesquely intertwined towers of plastrite and steel. 6 stormbirds touched down on the edge of the city, though it was hard to reconcile the sight before the legionnaires as they disembarked as having once been a city. All that remained were labyrinth passageways between groaning ruins, treacherous arrangements of buckled structural elements, and precariously balanced heaps of debris. Magnus disembarked and let out a stifled sob as the scale of the disaster threatened to overwhelm his psychic defenses. Such loss, such terror. So many taken so swiftly, he said, feeling too much, too deeply. How he wished he could undo what had happened here, to take away the pain and make good all that had been broken. The Thousand Suns formed up on their Primarch, and Magnus did his best to shield them from the psychic horror and grief of the city's people. How can we possibly navigate this? Asked Foss's Scar, staring in wonderment at the smashed city. Every schematic we have is useless. Nothing of the city street plan remains intact. We do not need schematics, snapped Magnus. Use your Corvidae senses and Aether sight to navigate. There are Medicae shuttles inbound behind us, so spread out and save as many of these people as you can. Another wave of stormbirds roared overhead, iron-hulled gunships, with a distinctive hazard striping of the 4th Legion. These were no ordinary craft, but workhorse transports modified to carry construction material. Behind them came a host of fat-bellied mechanicum conveyors, laden with heavy lifting rigs and rubble excavators. It had been a battle to convince Perturabo to divert any vessels to the rescue efforts in Atar. The resources were better spent in aiding those already in Kalania, his brother had said. The inference was clear. The deaths here would help balance the unforgiving arithmetic of the Iron Warriors' evacuation timetable. Perturabo had accounted for great loss of life in the process of that evacuation, and his predictions were being proved uncannily accurate. Magnus almost hated him in that moment. For the first time in his life, imagining what it would be like to strike one of his brothers. The moment had passed, and Magnus reluctantly conceded the necessity for such hard calculations, though it still sat ill with him to simply write off the inhabitants of Atar as statistics on a balance sheet of life and death. He had seen an opportunity amid the streams of information coming from Magos Stancrox's data gathering station, just beyond the tar. A name that had seen Perturabo finally authorize a rescue mission. "Move out," said Magnus. "I give you leave to use your powers wherever you can to help the Iron Warriors." "Is that wise, my lord?" asked Fossaskar. "They are already muttering what we can do." "Do not argue with me," said Magnus. "I will not let people die when we have the right to save them. Now go!" Fossaskar nodded as Magnus turned away. "Where are you going, my lord?" Fossaskar asked. "I am going to find Conrad Bagra," said Magnus. "The planetary governor's biotagging is non-functional," said Fossaskar. "It is likely he is already dead." "He is alive," said Magnus. "I know it." "Even if that is true, how will you find him among this?" "How little you know of me," said Magnus. "Trust me, my son. There is nowhere he can be that I cannot find him." Bowflex, man. Swirling dust hung in the air in choking veils, coating everything in white and burying the dead in ashen shrouds. Magnus let himself perceive the world in hues of psychic resonance, overlaying his already superlative vision with echoes unseen by most mortals. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, as if lamenting destruction around them. Stones split with grinding slowness, and steel reinforcement shrieked as it bent and slapped. Bloody survivors wandered numbly through the wreckage of their homes, vainly calling the names of loved ones and family members. The city was moaning with all of its voices. Muffled cries of wounded men and women echoed in the fallen canyons of broken buildings, but these were all too few. Atar's destruction had come so swiftly that most of its population had died without even knowing what was happening. Magnus pushed swiftly through the ruins, every one of his physical and subtle senses extending to guide him. Conrad Bagra was, unusually for imperial governors, a native of the compliant world. Morningstar's people remembered old Earth, and Bagra had willingly embraced the newly arrived imperial forces. His fervor had so impressed the expeditionary fleet commanders and Terran envoys that it only seemed logical to allow him to remain in command of Morningstar. His death could not be chalked simply to statistic. Magnus had only met Governor Bagra once, but that was enough. The mental imprint of a mind was so distinctive, as a genetic trace or a fingerprint. More so, as two minds, even those of genetic clones, were never identical. Even the fleeting contact would be enough to find the man. If ever. It leaned. Magnus paused in the shadow of a ruined structure that had once been the command center. It leaned at a dangerous angle, its facade sagging like wet parchment. Spalling shards of stone fell from its roof, and broken glass littered the ground before it. You're still alive! I know it! He had not lied to Fossiskar. Not really. Magnus had no direct knowledge of whether or not Conrad Bagro was alive or not. So this is my friend Magnus. He's a cool guy. And the big deal, all right, for those that might not have the context is, one day Magnus will commit great evil. Okay? His father forbade him from playing with magic, and still he did it. And he went to the emperor, and he wanted to warn the emperor that something terrible was coming, to undo all the works of this imperium. But he did not realize that he was that terrible thing, and that his warning was the herald of destruction. It is hubris. No vision could be entirely trusted, for the pathways into the future branched and divided so rapidly and unexpectedly that no one was ever set in stone. But it was enough to convince Magnus that a rescue effort into Atar was worth attempting. With a twist of thought, he detached his subtle body from his flesh, letting it drift in a nimbus of dazzling, silver-threaded light. Instantly, screaming thought forms of thousands of people stabbed into his mind like hot knives. He could not shut them out, and nor would he, even if that were possible. The least he could do was share a measure of the city's pain. The ruins sang with psychic howls of the dead and the dying, a wasteland of souls, untimely ripped from their bodies. Anguish filled its broken streets, a paean to suffering that clawed at the walls between worlds, and a siren song to the things that live beyond. He rose high above the city, seeing further and deeper, without a cage of blood and bone to confine him. The monumental scale of Atar's suffering was laid out before him, a shattering wasteland of stone and glass that had once been a thriving city. How fragile our grip is and all we have achieved, said Magnus. When everything can be swept away in the moment between breaths. The etheric realm was densely populated, thousands of red-lined ghosts drifting to the city on unseen winds, dead souls now lost in a place they had once known so well. Magnus hardened himself against the fear and confusion. They were already beyond any help he could offer, their energies already being drawn to the Imperium. You know what? I guess I'll just do a rep every time someone joins. I guess that's gonna be the game we play. Yeah, it's pretty good. There's it's not the only one he's in. There are two companion novels to this, and it's about the destruction of Magnus's world, but it's from two very different perspectives. Okay, and the funny thing is, right, is you could call the destroyers the ones that were wrong. You could say that they were misled. You could point a finger, but in the end, both sides were wrong. Both sides were misled, and both sides committed the worst atrocities. And that's typically how it is. If you're looking for the good guys, then I would probably recommend cartoons. Conrad Vagra's implanted biotracker might be non-functional, but his mind trace was a steady light burning in the heart of Tar. Magnus swooped over the city, past burning hab structures folded like plastboard, and over flaming ravines that had once been grand parks. He felt his legionaries moving through the city, flaring geysers of psychic power as they melted steel, lifted impossible weights, and eased pain with their gifts. Beyond the city, the hard gray souls of the Iron Warriors were entangling the unholy mess Vagra's troops had made of the evacuation, widening roadways, clearing wrecks, and restoring the flow of traffic to Kalania. Only a fraction of Atar's people would be saved, but how any of them could forgive themselves that they had turned a blind eye to the suffering. Well, was that statistically relevant? Magnus pushed that thought aside, following the light of Conrad Vagra's life until he finally found the man. His body was trapped within an overturned Rhino transport vehicle, its hull crushed beneath the wall of a collapsed foundry. The crew of the Rhino were dead, but Varga was still there, his aura jagged with pain and frustration. Magnus fixed the location in his mind and sped back where his physical form awaited, and volatile with a kind shield in the shadow of the Commerce building. He sighed as he returned to the weight of his physical form. How wondrous would it be to exist forever as a being of light and wonder, without the need for corporeal form? What evolutionary process or transformative act would be needed to achieve such a sublime state of being? Perhaps a question for another time. Perhaps he would call a symposium on the subject once they were all done with Morningstar. A lot of prophets, those ones that go to caves and see visions, they are schizophrenic. There's almost a schizophrenic highway, to getting there. Well, I think he has a book. I think Magnus wrote a book. He has like a spell book or something. I don't know why he needs it though. He just does it. He doesn't say any words or anything like that. But yeah, maybe he needs to read another book. Little remained to indicate Morningstar's first city had once stood here. The sky was unusually clear, and the air still. A moment of rare silence on a world tearing itself apart from within. Graham McNeil's been with me for quite a while. He's one of the big kids, I guess I'd say, in terms of the people I write. But he's getting so long-winded here. Like I'm reading sentences that are like lines long. It looks like fucking barcodes. There's something to be said about keeping things quaint. Atharva's visor readout told him he was standing exactly where he had seen Magnus walk from the storm. But little indication remained of that. Zarukan had all but vanished. The earth scored here more thoroughly than any invading army could hope to assault it. The walls of its great structures were gone, scattered like a fallen empire, with naught but dust as its legacy. Yeah, the dialogue is always a lot smoother. I find that I almost never mess it up, and if I get really good, I can like give them all individual names. I mean, like voices. All that remained was an undulating wasteland of smashed plascrete that looked to have fallen from a great height, twisted rebars jutting from exposed foundations like desert bracken. It's all gone, said Nico Ashali, bending to scoop a handful of the city's powdered remains. All is dust. What? I see there's nothing left, said Eshkali, standing and brushing her hands together. She glanced over her shoulder to where a single stripped-down stormbird, so skeletal and reduced, it really deserved no other designation. I am not sure why we are here. Are your warriors not required to aid the evacuation efforts? I've been wondering the same thing, said Hathor Mat, appearing at Atharva's side and scanning the desolate, empty surroundings. Why are we here? Atharva masked his irritation at Hathor Mat's loose tongue. He had not served with the warrior before now, but could read enough of his Pavani aura to know he was vain beyond most of that strutting fellowship. Along with Atharva and Hathor Mat, 4 other legionaries had been assigned on this mission. They were all from different companies and squads, to better disguise that they were no longer with their units. This mission reeked of subterfuge, and Atharva detested subterfuge. But the order came directly from his Primarch. Magnus had halted Atharva moments before departing for Atar and given him alternative orders. Return to Zarukin, said the Primarch. Zarukin? He had asked. The city is gone. There is nothing left of it. Magnus shook his head, and the intensity of his gaze was unsettling. You are wrong, Atharva. There is more yet to discover. I know it. The storm will have taken whatever remained of the city. No, something lies beyond, said Magnus. I did not have time to find it before, but you will go. What am I to look for? Magnus paused, as though turning his mind inwards. Look for the sign of a feathered arrowhead, he said at last. It will guide you. What does that mean? Magnus grinned, and Atharva felt himself mirroring the gesture. I do not know, but you will get to discover something wondrous, my son. Truth be told, I am jealous. Despite such a prospect, Atharva could not shake the notion they were doing something deceitful by being here, something that might have grave consequences. Was that Corvidae instinct or guilt at being here instead of helping the planetary relief efforts? He did not want to know, and that troubled him. Atharva took off his nagging feeling of unease and walked to the eerily quiet ruins, using the cracked foundations and sheared nubs of structural support to form a mental map of the vanished city. Spread out. Look for anything that could conceivably be a feathered arrowhead. What's that? Asked Hathor Mat. Something that will guide us, said Atharva. Now do it, and report in as soon as you see anything that matches that description. Hathor Mat and the others set off in various directions, quartering the ruins and hunting for something whose meaning was beyond them. Atharva watched them go and turned to Eshkali. Conservator Eshkali. Nico. Of course, I forget, said Atharva. Tell me, does a feathered arrowhead design have any particularly cultural or symbolic resonance on Morningstar? Perhaps, asked Ashkali. bending to draw a circle in the dust with her fingertip. Then, with 5 quick strokes, she drew a star in it. Tell me what you see. The planetary signal of Morningstar. Ash Kelly swept away the left and right portions of the star. Just over 30 years ago, some of the Agra settlers and the Valerian grottos uncovered some artifacts that appeared to date from the time of Old Night. What kinds of artifacts? Just scraps, really, said Ashkali, taping a finger against her lip as she sorted through the memories. Partially decayed cloth that might have been in uniforms, metal fragments, and smashed pieces of machinery. But the best preserved piece was what looked like the remains of a helmet. A warrior's helmet? I do not believe so. It appeared to be a primitive environment helmet from an old void suit. Here, I'll show you. Atharva leaned down as Ashkali produced the data slate from her hip pouch and began scrolling through the grainy imagery, pulling from an archive database. Where are you? She said, flipping through the scans of rumbling relics. Ah, there it is. The image quality was poor, the lousy atmospherics disrupting the connection. But Atharva had a thrill of familiarity as he stared at the wavering image. The helm had once been bright yellow, but had faded with age and damage. A painted insignia above the cracked visor was still visible, faint, but unmistakably that of a vectored arrow encircled by a stylized ring and wreath that could easily be interpreted as feathers. Some of the oldest settlers claim this was Morningstar's original signal, and the other points of the star were added later, said Ashkali. They may well be correct. You know this symbol? A variant of it, yes. Where did you see it? On Terra? Yes. When the Eastern ethnarchs fell, the Thousand Sons marched across the circled remains of the Dragon Nations, preserving and learning all we could of that land's ancient history and culture. Much had already been lost in the fires of self-immolation. But in the ruins of Bashu, we found the remains of a storage facility for rockets intended to bear atomic warheads. However, that did not appear to be its original designation. Its true purpose was a launch station for transorbital craft, perhaps the first to breach the solar system. Some of the walls had faded visions of this symbol painted on them. I see, said Ashkali. But why would you send your men to look for you? Why would you send them to look for a symbol now? Because I have been told it will guide us. Guide us to what? I do not know, said Atharva. My Primarch believes the city, yet keeps secrets from us. This symbol will guide us to them. No sooner had the words left his lips than he had felt a flare of emotion from Hathor Mat. The legionary's excitement was palpable, his Provine affiliations transmitting a measure of it to Atharva. He pushed himself to the fourth enumeration to counter it with reason. Atharva, you have to see this. Yes, what is it? What have you found? Best you come see for yourself. Ashkali saw the change in his body language and cocked her head to one side. What is it? We've found something, said Atharva. They were off through the dead city towards where Hathor Mat was waiting, within the remains of a vast structure, easily capable of housing an entire vehicle regiment. Its roof was gone, and only the lower reaches of its reinforced wall remained intact. Hathor Mat stood at the edge of what looked like an elevator shaft for bringing up vehicles from a subterranean hangar. He turned as they approached, and his aura was alight with dancing colors, greens, golds, blues. What is it? Said Atharva, as he and Ashkali picked a path through the rubble towards him. Hathor Mat simply pointed downwards. Atharva reached the edge of the shaft and leaned over. Bare plasticrete walls plunged hundreds of meters into the earth, and portions of a buckled metal stairwell were bolted around its perimeter. Cracked lumen globes stuttered, telling Atharva that power still flowed somewhere below. At the base of the shaft was a curved expanse of bare metal, formed of riveted iron sheets. Its surface was rusted, after centuries or more, spent beneath the ground, and its center was a gleaming hatch with an armor-glass portal. "What is it?" began Ashkali. "Those are hull plates," said Hathor Mat, "of a starship." It is so much more than that," said Atharva, seeing the icon from the damaged helmet emblazoned on the sealed hatch. "What do you mean?" said Ashkali. "I mean, it is a Terran colony ship." It's a cool revelation, I guess, but yeah, I guess they foreshadowed this a little bit. Yeah, there's a decent amount of foreshadowing. I guess I'm just the Horus Heresy writers. They have this habit of creating these like side characters that end up overshadowing who the very book is about. And Graham McNeil's not so bad about it, but Dan Abnett is damn dirty about it because he'll just. So far, the one book that this reminds me the most is of Legion. I'm really hoping, and the thing with Legion though, right, is it was kind of a slog, but at the end they just dropped all these truth bombs. They just dropped all these freaking truth bombs. Like the last 30 pages of Legion really made it worth everything. All right, I suppose that's it for now.